Everybody knows that the Ace Attorney series has the single best soundtrack in video games. There are two key ways that it pulls this off, on top of the music itself just slapping, obviously. Firstly, there's the escalation. The investigations themes build intrigue as you learn about the case before cutting to the pursuit themes to amp up the tension. And of course, there's always that final glorious moment where the cornered theme kicks in and things really start unraveling. Secondly, there's character themes. Take Maya, for example. Her theme is cheerful and bouncy and reflects her personality as well as her narrative position as a peppy sidekick. It also mostly plays during the opening of cases before things have started going wrong, making an association between her and the more upbeat moments of the game. This is where I have to start getting into spoilers, and I'm eventually going to cover both the Ace Attorney trilogy and Ace Attorney Investigations 1, so heads up for that. But contrast Maya's theme with Damon Gant's. This is stately, reflecting Gant's position as chief of police. It's so laid back, perfect for somebody who thinks he's completely in control. Of course, this isn't the music we hear when he does start getting flustered. But the track that I really want to talk about today is this one. This is Franziska von Karma's theme, and if you've played the games, you've probably just had a very specific image burst into your head. This track is one of the most effective uses of music in the Ace Attorney series. Right up until it isn't. But let's start with what's great about it. This track plays at the pivotal moment of Justice for All, probably the best part of an already fantastic game. In the final case, Farewell My Turnabout, Phoenix has come to realize that his client, who he's supposed to be defending, actually did hire a contract killer to off a rival actor, but Phoenix can't say that because the killer also kidnapped Maya to ensure his cooperation. Phoenix has been stalling for days at this point, hoping they can find Maya, but he's run out of time and there's nothing he can do, and he's just standing there head in hands, utterly defeated. And then this track starts playing. Franziska von Karma, who to this point has been rude and cruel to you for the entire game, bursts into the courtroom with last-minute evidence that was stolen from a crime scene by a recently fired detective who couldn't deliver the evidence himself because he got into a car crash, making Franziska the only person who could track him down after leaving her hospital bed less than 48 hours after being shot, also by the aforementioned contract killer, and still making it to the courtroom in time to pull off what Phoenix literally calls a miracle. God, these games rule. And the music you hear truly makes the moment. Ace Attorney has a knack for cutting its soundtrack in and out right when it needs to. Of course, the most famous example is presenting the piece of evidence that'll totally blow a witness's lie out of the water and hearing that sweet silence. But it works just as well in reverse, and this is easily the best example of that. The track is literally called Great Revival, or sometimes it's more literally translated as Triumphant Return. And god, yeah, it just sounds like that, right? It sounds like you're bursting through the doors of a courtroom unexpectedly to bring victory to a man who's on the brink of losing everything. But there's a funny thing about this song. Even though it literally has Franziska's name in the title, in the game that it's introduced in, Justice for All, it's mostly used for Miles Edgeworth. In fact, his first appearance isn't until well after the game's halfway point when he makes his triumphant return, or possibly you could call it a great revival, popping up in the police station like he didn't just fake his death for a year. This is a fascinating choice because Edgeworth gets his own version of this track, and more on that later, but that's not what's used in that moment. It's specifically the Franziska version. This is one of the cleverest things Ace Attorney does with its music. By overlapping the context of when certain songs are playing, it can imply a lot more than is explicitly said. For example, the corner theme that I mentioned earlier is always linked to Phoenix making a breakthrough. You're quickly attuned to its connection with success, until suddenly in the third case of the first game it kicks in when Edgeworth is about to win. On one hand, it shows that things have gotten completely out of Phoenix's control. Edgeworth's taken it all, even his victory song. On the other hand, it plays because Edgeworth isn't quite so sure that he should be winning at all, and actually ends up helping Phoenix and finding the truth of the case, beginning his redemption arc and demonstrating the theme of success coming via cooperation and partnership. But what about when they give Edgeworth Franziska's theme? The two are very connected by their childhoods, but while that might explain both of them having a similar leitmotif, as happens with other related characters, it doesn't explain why her theme specifically plays during his revival. For that, we have to look at Franziska herself. We already know, based on a great conversation in a terrible case, that Franziska is here because of Edgeworth. When she first appears, she's constantly furious towards Phoenix and will only tell him that she's dedicated to beating him in court for two reasons: perfection and revenge. Phoenix, and likely the player, assume that this revenge is for her father, Manfred von Karma, who was defeated by Phoenix and ultimately sent to jail and probably executed for murder. It's a very reasonable assumption, but Franziska never actually says that, and eventually ends up explaining that she's not looking for revenge for Manfred at all, but for her quote-unquote little brother, Edgeworth. As I mentioned, Edgeworth vanished after the events of the first game, leaving behind a cryptic message that everyone interpreted as a suicide note. Franziska, in part because of her similar hang-ups caused by Manfred, assumes that Edgeworth left because he lost in court and it ended his perfect record, and so she blames Phoenix. That's her motive for revenge, not anything to do with her father. But also, she doesn't really believe that Edgeworth is dead, and she thinks that if she defeats Phoenix, he'll come back. Which is not far off what ends up happening. Edgeworth does come back because of Franziska's actions. That scene where her theme plays over his reappearance is as much about Franziska as it is about Edgeworth. In the conversation that's happening the moments just before he arrives, she's lashing out about her damaged win record, and when Edgeworth shows up, he talks about how she's all quote-unquote ego and pride with a very clear sense of personal recognition. Because while Edgeworth mostly didn't leave because he lost a few cases, he certainly did have the same perfectionist tendencies. His arc from Justice for All onwards is seeing how damaging that mindset was to him and to the people around him, and he understands that Franziska is struggling with the same problem largely because they're both so influenced by Manfred von Karma. Not only does this moment highlight the siblings' similarities, it highlights that they're at different points of dealing with it. Franziska's entrenched ways are reinforced right before we get a show of Edgeworth's incomplete progress towards a more healthy approach. And because of that comparison that's being made, the soundtrack doesn't just connect them in this moment, it foreshadows the beginning of a resolution for Franziska. When we hear the track again, we're primed to think about her character arc in comparison with Edgeworth's, and of course the most impactful time that we hear it is that fantastic moment where she bursts into the courtroom. So as well as elevating that moment itself, it acts as a demonstration that she's taken on board some of what Edgeworth said and is growing as a person. After all, this moment is her helping Phoenix. It's her searching for the truth rather than a conviction. These are both key things that Edgeworth learned to do, and this song playing directly parallels their two arcs. Unfortunately, this is a little subtle, because the narrative certainly doesn't give Edgeworth and Franziska the same care. Edgeworth gets one of the most endearing arcs in video games, while Franziska ends up crying about him leaving her behind. That moment could have been a springboard for her in the following games, but she just doesn't get the same amount of attention and agency, something that affects a lot of the female characters in the series. When we see Franziska again, it's at the end of the third game, Trials and Tribulations, or about a year of in-game time later, and she does seem to have grown quite a bit. She's still standoffish, but she helps out both Phoenix and Edgeworth a lot. She agrees to act as the prosecutor in the case as a convenience, and she becomes Phoenix's investigation assistant for a while. She's actually pretty emotionally supportive of everything he's dealing with in that case, which is a lot, and she ultimately spends hours working on unlocking puzzle locks to try and rescue Maya. But there's so much going on in that case, and as nice as those things I described are, it's kind of a more convenient way to have a stand-in prosecutor so that Edgeworth can get his defense attorney arc, and so that Phoenix can have someone to talk to during investigations when neither Maya or Pearl is around, and then she's given a convenient way to exit the story when she's no longer needed. And because of that, we don't really see whether she's shed that perfectionism and insecurity that defined her in Justice for All. In fact, when we do speak to her, it seems like she's taken a step backwards. She still talks about her perfect win record, something that doesn't actually exist anymore. It's like she hasn't changed since the beginning of Justice for All, let alone moved on since its end. There's even a line that seems to retcon that really interesting thread about revenge I mentioned earlier. Phoenix asks her whether she still holds a grudge against him for revealing Manfred's crimes, and she doesn't reply, even though she said back in Justice for All that she didn't care about that at all. All of this is a little disappointing, but mostly undramatic, and it also has nothing to do with music. Unfortunately, how Franziska's theme track is used after Justice for All is one of my least favourite things in the entire series. Firstly, they split Edgeworth off into using his own version. So far so good. This is basically the same track but lower pitched, which makes it feel a bit more relaxed and somehow suits Edgeworth feeling less like he has something to prove. But for some godforsaken reason, Franziska's track is also given to her father. I think I would be pretty torn on this if they had given Manfred his own Great Revival track when he reappears in the flashback sections of Ace Attorney Investigations. On one hand, I think it works better as a sibling theme that actually reflects their resilience in overcoming Von Karma's teachings, but it would be kind of wonderfully tragic if their music remained clearly connected to Von Karma. It could easily be like their clothes or their animations, both of which are clearly influenced by him, but which also have their own character to them. I mean, you could make Fran and Miles' variations in each game feel slightly less like his each time to reflect their growing away from his teachings. But there isn't a Manfred von Karma version of Great Revival. When he appears, it's literally Franziska's character theme that plays. This track being used for both of them collapses the distance between her and her father, despite this being the most interesting part of her character. And unfortunately, the narrative doesn't do anything to avoid that either. Franziska has all this potential in Justice for All. There's such a clear setup for her to be, yes, Manfred's daughter, the thing you expect at the start, but also for her to be a character with an arc that takes her in an interesting direction, gives her room to exist outside of his ongoing narrative influence. We get this kind of subversion of expectations with so many characters in the game, in particular practically every prosecutor. But for Franziska, the track that's supposed to remind me of this incredible moment where she broke out of expectations that were too small for her, instead gets overridden by this fucking guy. I know the problem isn't the music itself, it's the way that Ace Attorney makes female characters into the supporting cast of male ones, not to mention the way that it drops threads between games constantly, losing its most interesting themes and narratives in the process. But with a soundtrack so good, it's the misuse of it that stands out the most. Thank you so much for watching. I just wanted to add at the end here that if you enjoyed this video, I have a podcast where all I do is talk about Ace Attorney. It's called Turnabout Breakdown, and I'll put a link in the description. A few months ago, we finished our first season, and this autumn I'm starting over with 3 new co-hosts, and recording has been a real blast so far, so I think this is a good time to get on board. As for videos, I have some things that I want to make, but I wrote the script for this in 2022, and before I got around to making it, they literally localized Ace Attorney Investigations 2, which I never thought was gonna happen. So maybe before Ace Attorney 7 comes out, we'll see.